you all at this first launch meeting. I'm very proud to be here with you. And I think it's really important because 5 years ago, I think anti-austerity seemed like quite an academic term. It wasn't something that you could host a meeting about, and it wasn't something that the media was really talking about. You couldn't get the trade unions, let alone the Labour Party, talking about anti-austerity. But now we've just had the leader of the opposition elected on an explicit and uncompromising platform of anti-austerity. And the pro-austerity consensus in this country has been smashed to pieces, and that's because of people like you coming together, having meetings like this, discussing ideas. You could be at home watching the X Factor auditions on your Saturday night tonight, but you're not. You're here talking about anti-austerity. So thank you for having this meeting. Thanks for coming together, and thanks for being part of smashing that pro-austerity consensus. Now, I work at the National Union of Students, so I want to talk a little bit about a couple of issues that are affecting students at the moment. And the first one is the cuts to maintenance grant, which the government is proposing and was outlined in George Osborne's budget back in July. And what this means is that the maintenance grants that the poorest students going to university can access are going to be turned into loans. So if you're from the poorest sections of society, you'll be taking on the biggest amount of debt when you graduate. So it's completely unprogressive, completely regressive. So yesterday I was outside Joe Johnston's office, and he's the MP for Orpington. He's also Boris Johnson's brother and the Minister for Universities. And I was there with a bunch of students with banners and placards and megaphones, making a lot of noise about the grants cut. And we were stood on a main road actually in Orpington, and we're getting amazing response from bus drivers, people in their cars picking up their kids from school, saying good on you, tooting their horns. And we were joined by hundreds of students right across the country who were doing demonstrations similar to that outside the offices of loads of Tory MPs, George Osborne, Sajid Javid, loads of them across the country. I think it's really important that we don't let this go, that we step up the pressure on the cuts to grants, because the government isn't going to stop there. It feels as though everything already that I had in order to access education maintenance allowance when I went to college, the grant to go to university, is just being cut back. And education is being attacked from all angles as well. We've got anti-immigration policy, forcing our international students to line up outside police stations in order to register. Marketisation, forcing our lecturers and our teachers to line up on pickets. Attacks to the welfare state, forcing graduates to line up at food banks and in job centres. So it's up to us to pull together, to stand in those lines with those people and to strengthen our movement. Building on the pro-migrant and the pro-refugee movement, building on the trade union movement and building on the student movement. This government is showing no sign of compromising, so we have to be uncompromising in our fight back as well. Now, the funding crisis in education, I think, is also massively linked to the housing crisis. And this week, I've been representing students who, new students, freshers, going to university for the first time, some of them coming to this country for the first time, who have applied to university and registered for student accommodation. But when they've arrived, they've been told there's no rooms in halls, actually, and for the first few weeks, you're going to be staying in a B&B. And this is because of a huge funding gap in universities, meaning that they're over-recruiting students but underfunding their support services for them. It's all about getting people through the door, taking in their tuition fee income, but not supporting them when they get there. And because we've allowed the privatisation over the last 10 years of the housing sector, not just selling off student accommodation to private providers, but also selling off our social housing stock through the right to buy scheme, which I think we should be calling the wrong to sell scheme, allowing developers to build without any affordability targets, which is effectively socially cleansing whole parts of our communities and society. And it's got to change. We've got to start building good, decent, affordable council housing in every town and city. And in the private rented sector, we need to be organising for rent controls. Scotland activists, amazingly, just a few weeks ago, convinced the Scottish Government to introduce rent controls there, meaning that rents will actually be linked to the rise in wages, not linked to an arbitrary market. This isn't impossible either. You know, there's actually more land devoted to golf courses in this country than there is to housing. And on our way from London down to Eastbourne today, that was absolutely clear. There's so many golf courses around here, but where's the social housing? So we need to be bringing all of these issues together, whether it's education, housing, refugees, everything. Organising, mobilising, unionising in our communities. Because we've had enough of being beaten down by a marketised education system that is paying vice-chancellors millions and keeping the lowest paid and students in poverty. We've had enough of handing over our loans to private landlords only so they can profit from our debt. We've had enough of graduating only to earn the minimum wage, if we're lucky, else we're on the dole. We've had enough of bosses exploiting us on 0 hours contracts, unpaid internships, poor terms and conditions because they know there are thousands more of us queuing up, waiting for any job that will pay, even the minimum wage. We've had enough, and now it's time to fight back. And I'm going to be fighting back in Manchester on the 4th of October for the Tory Party conference. I hope many of you will be joining us. Thank you.